You are standing in a room filled with people who are openly grieving. Perhaps it is a funeral, or perhaps a friend is sharing a heartbreaking story about a recent loss. You look around and see tears streaming down faces. You hear the cracks in their voices. You know, logically, that the situation is tragic. You know that you care about these people and the person they have lost, yet, inside, you feel absolutely nothing. You are thinking about what you might have for lunch later, or you are noticing a stain on the carpet. You check your internal emotional dashboard, expecting to see sadness, but the needle is sitting at 0. This absence of feeling can be far more terrifying than the presence of pain. When we feel sad, we know we are hurt. When we feel nothing, we wonder if we are broken. You might ask yourself if you are a monster or if you lack basic human empathy. You might try to force a reaction, squeezing your eyes shut and willing a tear to fall just to prove that you are still human. But the harder you try, the more dry and distant you feel. This experience is not a sign of a character defect. It is a psychological state known as emotional numbness or detachment. To understand why this happens, we need to shift our perspective on what emotions actually are. We tend to think of emotions as constant flowing rivers that we swim in. But for the brain, emotions are high-energy events. Processing deep grief, intense fear, or even overwhelming joy requires a significant amount of neurological and physical energy. Sometimes the input becomes too much. If you touch a hot stove, your hand pulls back before you even register the pain. Your body has a reflex to save you from damage. Your mind has a similar reflex for emotional overload. Think of your emotional system like the electrical wiring in a house. If you plug too many high-voltage appliances into one outlet, you risk starting a fire. To prevent the house from burning down, the circuit breaker trips. It cuts the power instantly. The lights go out, the appliances stop humming, and the danger passes. Emotional numbness is your brain tripping the circuit breaker. At some point in your history, likely during a time of high stress or trauma, the intensity of your feelings threatened to overwhelm your ability to cope. To keep you functioning, your brain pulled the plug. This mechanism is often referred to as dissociation or affect phobia. Affect phobia is essentially a fear of feelings. It is not that you do not have emotions, it is that your internal system has labeled those emotions as dangerous threats. If you grew up in an environment where crying was mocked, ignored, or punished, your brain learned a powerful lesson. It learned that vulnerability leads to pain. Over time, the suppression becomes automatic. You no longer have to consciously decide not to cry. The defense mechanism engages before the feeling even reaches your conscious awareness. The problem with this survival strategy is that it is not selective. You cannot numb the dark side of the spectrum without also numbing the light. When you trip the circuit breaker to avoid grief, you also cut the power to joy, excitement, and connection. You end up living in a gray zone, functioning efficiently, but feeling fundamentally removed from the texture of life. This creates a sense of isolation that is difficult to explain to others, because on the surface, you seem perfectly fine. You can recognize this state through several recurring patterns in your daily life. The first pattern is the sensation of being an observer rather than a participant. You might feel like a robot or an anthropologist studying human behavior. You watch other people laugh or cry, and you understand why they are doing it, but you cannot replicate the frequency. You might go through the motions of social interaction, saying the right words and making the appropriate facial expressions, but it feels like a performance. You are reading from a script. This robot mode is often highly functional. In a crisis, you are likely the calmest person in the room. While everyone else is falling apart, you are calling the insurance company, organizing the logistics, and making the coffee. People might even compliment you on how strong you are, but this strength is brittle. It is not born of resilience, it is born of disconnection. You are not handling the emotion. You have simply put it in a box and locked it in the basement. A second common pattern is the disconnect between your mind and your body. Just because your mind has shut down the emotional experience does not mean the energy has vanished. Emotions are physiological events. They involve hormones, heart rate, and muscle tension. When the mind refuses to acknowledge the sadness, the body often carries the burden. You might not be able to cry, but you may feel a constant, crushing tightness in your chest. You might have a perpetual lump in your throat that makes it hard to swallow. You might experience chronic fatigue or tension headaches that have no medical cause. Your body is trying to process the grief that your mind has rejected. You might feel physically heavy, as if you are walking through water. It is a strange paradox. Your eyes are dry, but your body is screaming. You might even feel the physical urge to cry, the stinging in the nose, the pressure behind the eyes, but the release never comes. The valve is stuck. The third pattern is intellectualization. This is a favorite tool for high-functioning adults. Instead of feeling an emotion, you analyze it. If a relationship ends, you might immediately launch into a logical autopsy of why it didn't work. You list the compatibility issues, the timing factors, and the statistical probability of success. You talk about the event with friends, but you speak in paragraphs that sound like a clinical report. You say things like, "I am processing a lot of sadness right now," but you say it with the same tone you would use to order a coffee. Intellectualization acts as a dam. It allows you to interact with the concept of the emotion without getting wet. You remain safely on the dry bank of logic, observing the river of feeling from a distance. You might convince yourself that you have dealt with the issue because you understand it, but understanding is not the same as feeling. You can understand the chemical composition of water, but that will not quench your thirst. Healing requires experience, not just analysis. Breaking through this numbness requires patience and a sense of safety. You cannot force the circuit breaker back on by sheer will. If you try to force yourself to cry, you will likely just increase your anxiety, which reinforces the numbness. The goal is to gently signal to your brain that it is safe to feel again. We need to bypass the heavy defenses of the rational mind and work with the body and the subconscious. One practical tool is to shift your focus from emotion to sensation. Words like sadness or grief can be triggering for someone with affect phobia. They carry too much weight. Instead, practice simple interoception. Sit quietly and scan your body. Do not look for feelings. Look for physical data. Is your chest hot or cold? Is your stomach tight or loose? Is there a pressure behind your eyes? Describe these sensations to yourself using neutral language. I notice a heaviness in my shoulders. I notice a vibrating sensation in my solar plexus. By focusing on the physical, you are staying present with the reality of your state without triggering the danger alarm that rings when you try to name the emotion. This builds a bridge between your mind and body. You're teaching your brain that you can pay attention to internal signals without being destroyed by them. A second tool is what we might call proxy feeling. Sometimes, our own lives feel too high stakes to cry about. The defense mechanisms are guarding your personal history too closely. In these cases, it can be helpful to use fiction as a side door. Watch a movie or read a book that you know is sad. Listen to a piece of music that has a melancholic tone. When you cry for a fictional character, your defense system often stays asleep because the threat is not real. It feels safer to weep for a dog in a movie than for your own lost childhood. However, the release is real. The physiological process of crying releases stress hormones and soothes the nervous system, regardless of the trigger. Think of this as priming the pump. You are lubricating the rusty machinery of your emotional expression. You are reminding your body what it feels like to let go in a controlled, low-risk environment. A third practical tool is low-stakes expression through movement or mark-making. Since the verbal centers of the brain are often dominated by the intellectual defense, try to bypass words entirely. Take a piece of paper and a crayon or a pen. Do not try to draw a picture. Just make marks that match your internal energy. If you feel tight, make tight, jagged lines. If you feel heavy, make dark, slow circles. Alternatively, use sound. Not words, but humming or toning. Sometimes a low hum can vibrate the chest and loosen that feeling of constriction. These activities might feel silly at first, but they are ways to externalize internal energy without needing to make sense of it. You are opening a small valve to let some pressure out. It is a way of saying to your system, "I am listening," without demanding a full confession. There is a common myth that keeps people locked in numbness. It is the fear of the floodgates. You might believe that if you let yourself cry, even once, you will never stop. You imagine a bottomless pit of despair that will swallow you whole if you step close to the edge. You fear that if you start feeling, you will collapse and be unable to function in your job or your life. This is a very common fear for people who have been strong for a long time. The reality of emotion is different. Emotions are like waves. They are not static states. A wave builds, peaks, crashes, and then recedes. No feeling lasts forever. The average lifespan of a strong emotional wave, if left uninterrupted, is only about 90 seconds to a few minutes. The reason grief feels like it lasts forever is often because we are fighting it. The resistance locks the wave in place. When you actually surrender to the sob, the body processes it, and eventually the body quiets down. You will not cry forever. You will cry, and then you will be tired, and then you will be hungry. Life continues. Consider the story of someone who prided themselves on being the rock of their family. For years, they never shed a tear, even through divorces and job losses. They felt efficient but hollow. One day, they dropped a glass of milk in the kitchen. It shattered. Suddenly, they found themselves sobbing on the floor. It wasn't about the milk. The small, insignificant accident bypassed their defenses because it seemed too trivial to guard against. They cried for 10 minutes. They felt embarrassed, but then they noticed something strange. The chronic tension in their shoulders was gone. They slept better that night than they had in years. The dam had cracked, and the world didn't end. They realized that their strength did not come from holding the water back. It came from learning how to swim. Emotional numbness is not a life sentence, and it is not a flaw in your personality. It is a shield that you forged in a fire you didn't ask for. It served you well when you needed it. It allowed you to survive, to keep walking when things were too heavy to carry. Be grateful for the shield, but recognize that it is heavy to wear all the time. As you move forward, try to offer yourself the safety you didn't have in the past. You don't need to force the door open with a crowbar. You just need to let your nervous system know that the war is over. You can afford to feel now. You can afford to be human. Start with the small things: a sad song, a tight chest, a moment of honesty. Slowly, the ice will begin to thaw, and you will find that the capacity to feel pain returns hand in hand with the capacity to feel joy.